New York City has reportedly agreed to its largest settlement ever in a civil rights case, a story that captured the country's attention in the late 1980s, following a heinous attack on a woman in Central Park, and one that inflamed racial tensions in the city and added to a perception of lawlessness. New York will make the payments to 5 men who were wrongly convicted and came to be known as the Central Park Five. Jeffrey Brown has the story, beginning with more background.
The $40 million settlement comes 25 years after one of the most sensationalized crimes in New York City's history. In 1989, passers-by found the nearly lifeless body of a white 28-year-old woman, much later identified as Tricia Miley, in a wooded area of Central Park. She had been raped, beaten, and left for dead while jogging. She was in a coma for 12 days. 5 black and Latino defendants, all between 14 and 16, were arrested and portrayed by police and in the media as part of a marauding and wilding pack of youths who rampaged through the park that night. The 5 were convicted on a series of charges related to the assault and served sentences ranging from 7 to 13 years. But lawyers argued there was a lack of physical evidence linking the 5 to the crime, and that the convictions were based almost entirely on coerced written and videotaped confessions like this one.
What happened when you charged her?
We charged her, and we got her on the ground. Everybody started hitting her and stuff.
Then, in 2002, convicted murderer and serial rapist Matthias Reyes told police he had been the rapist. DNA evidence confirmed his claim.
Motion is granted. Everyone have a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Later that year, a New York State Supreme Court judge vacated the earlier convictions. Today's agreement could close the book on the decade-long civil rights lawsuit brought against the police and prosecutors for wrongful arrest amid a racially motivated conspiracy. The city, under Mayor Michael Bloomberg, fought the suit for years. But new Mayor Bill de Blasio pledged to, quote, right this injustice. In 2012, filmmaker Ken Burns, with his daughter Sarah and her husband David McMahon, released a documentary chronicling the crime and its aftermath. And we're joined now by Craig Stephen Wilder, a professor of urban American history at MIT, who followed the case closely and was featured in that documentary. Well, welcome to you. Can you take us back first, take us back in time? How and why did this become such a huge event in the history of the city?
I think there are multiple factors that informed why this became such an important event, both in New York City and nationally. I think New Yorkers, white and black, had by the 1980s certainly come to fear that the police and the prosecutors were unable to protect them. In a 3-month period in 1984, there was a horrific police brutality case. Eleanor Bumpers, an elderly black woman, was shot to death by the police department. And 3 months later, Bernie Goetz, actually the vigilante subway shooter, emerged on the scene. And both of those events in that roughly 3-month period actually captured the extent to which New Yorkers feared both crime and also doubted the capacity of the police and the prosecutors to protect them in that moment.
Yeah. So that was followed by many, many years of a long legal battle, first over what actually happened that night in the park, and that case was overturned. And then this long legal battle over what to do, the restitution process.
Right, right. And you have, a young white woman, well-educated investment banker, Tricia Miley, perfectly innocent, jogging in Central Park, brutally assaulted and left for dead. The police round up multiple, in fact, dozens of young black and brown men and begin to, in fact, release the story that they had the culprits. And from that point on, they were on a track, and they resisted, in fact, the facts. They had created blinders to the facts, and they had presented the public with there was tremendous pressure for the police to actually be able to resolve this case. There was tremendous pressure for the prosecutors to bring it to closure. And once they actually announced that they had the culprits, it was difficult to backtrack from that point on. And so we end up with a situation in which basically a group of young men, a group of children, were actually turned over to the prosecution, tried as adults, and eventually tossed into adult men's prisons.
After the case was overturned, then was the the second legal struggle that culminates today. The city resisted that as well for a long time as well. And I think the argument, and tell me, the argument was that, yes, it was a wrongful conviction, but no, it wasn't done purposefully.
Right. I think the city's position has been that they couldn't find evidence of an intentional, willful violation of the rights of the 5 boys, now young men, who were prosecuted at that time. And we also have to remember that when this case unfolded, when it began to unravel in 2002, the police department was allowed to investigate itself at that point and to declare itself innocent.
What has happened to the 5 men?
You know, I've met 4 of the 5. I've spent time with them and their families. And the one thing I'm really quite pleased with today is I hope that this settlement actually starts to bring them and their families, their parents, their children, their spouses, some sense of resolution and vindication. I think it's also an important moment in the history of New York City because we also need to look back at that moment. We need to look back at the Central Park case and its aftermath and really hold ourselves accountable and our public institutions accountable. And I hope this is the beginning of that process.
Well, one wonders, does this end the case? Or in what ways are any of these issues still with us today?
Oh, I don't think it ends the case at all. You know, the reality is that in the aftermath of the Central Park case, almost every state in the United States passed laws making it easier to try children as adults. We moved thousands and thousands of children into the adult criminal system. By the mid-1990s, we had reached a peak in the number of children being tried as adults, and much of that was actually flamed by the furor over the Central Park case.
So
that lives with us today. That legacy lives with us today.
Mm-hmm. But the city at least has resolved it. It's part of it.
The city's resolved its part with the 5 young men who were wrongfully convicted. But in fact, there's a lot of work left to do. You know, I think the era of aggressive policing, extensive incarceration periods, et cetera, is not over. Mass incarceration is actually continuing to destroy families and communities, and that actually still has to be addressed. We actually have a lot of work to do in our criminal justice system today.
All right, Craig Stephen Wilder, thank you so much.
Thank you.